Yes, sir. I sure can.
Well, thank you for joining us. Hope you're recuperating from your knee surgery.
I haven't had that yet. I'm overseas with my wife on my that's the 24th.
Okay. All right. Well, we hope to see you before then. This meeting will now be called to order. It's the May 15, 2018 JEA Board Meeting. I'll ask everyone to stand for a moment of reflection and ask that you remember the family of the JSO officer who was lost in an accident this morning. Thank you. If you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have an agenda that's been published. I have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
The agenda is adopted as presented. Turn to Mr. Zahn for a safety briefing.
Thank you, Chair. Safety is a core value of JEA. In the event of emergency, my understanding is Ted Hobson will dial 911. Mike Brost has elected to do CPR. In the event of evacuation, please help your neighbor. Buddy system is the person on your right. Make sure that you account for them. Use the stairs to the left of the elevator, orderly, and hold the handrails on the way down. The exit onto the plaza and proceeding to the open parking lot on the southeast corner of Main and Church Street. Please make sure to safely cross the street as well. As a reminder, please put all cell phones on silent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Turn to our Chief Legal Officer, Ms. Jody Brooks, for our Sunshine Law statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a publicly noticed meeting. The minutes will be taken. There is quorum present in the room, and we're in proper posture to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any comment cards. Do we have any public speakers? Any comment cards? Nope. Great. Moving right along. Recognize the Honorable Matt Schellenberg, Council Liaison.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and the board. I have nothing to say.
Thank you. And I don't see Dr. Gaffney, so we'll skip the Mayor Liaison. And then I'll turn to Mr. Zahn for the introduction of the board agenda.
Yeah, so for the benefit of the board, each of you have had a chance to review this, but also for the media and the public and the people in the room, you'll notice a different agenda for this board format. The intent is to provide more concise and an open format for the board and our leadership to communicate with each other as well as with the public. You'll notice three distinct sections. The operations section, this is for where the board will discuss core business items as well as agenda items that that the board intends to take action on. Strategy. This section is a new section and allows for an open format for the board to discuss and provide feedback to management on key elements of the business without the need for action, but allows for us to get feedback. The last section is a much more unique one, which is subject matter exploration. This section provides a forum for our great team to be able to shine. There's a lot of wonderful work that's done by our employees in this building and outside of this building, and our intent is to be able to highlight the work that they're doing, the issues that they're facing, and also perhaps draw on some third-party experts to present facts and insights to the board on critical business, marketing, community trends. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Next on the agenda at 3A is the consent agenda, approving the minutes of prior meetings. May I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor for the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. It passes unanimously. Recognize Ryan Wanamaker, our interim CFO, for presentation of the annual disclosure reports. Mr. Wanamaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be covering item 3B in your packets today. This is an action item related to the JEA FY 2017 annual disclosure reports for the electric and the water and sewer and district energy systems. We're requesting authorization and approval for filing and use of the annual disclosure reports for each system. for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2017, in order to comply with JEA's continuing disclosure undertakings for its bonds and various credit agreements. Under those agreements, these annual disclosure reports are required to be filed June 1st of each year for the prior fiscal year. With board approval today, the annual disclosure reports for each system for the fiscal year ended September 30th, 2017, will be filed with the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board. Drafts of the annual disclosure reports for the systems were distributed to members at the March 20th meeting, and additional changes were made and provided to members at the April 17th meeting. Based on feedback from the last board meeting, as well as conversation at last week's F&A committee meeting and a handful of individual comments that have been provided over the past month, we have included some further updates as redlined with this item. Specifically, materials provided with today's meeting include change pages from both drafts versus the April 17th draft. And those changes primarily related to a few items: senior management team changes, the latest management organization structure, and several new and updated management and team member bios. We added some addition to the privatization discussion to include the mayor's statement that he will not put a privatization plan before the city council. And then finally, we had an addition of some handful of Plant Vogel discussion items based on feedback from the F&A committee meeting, again, last week, and individual comments from board members. There are also a few minor content and format cleanup items reflected in those red lines. Finally, members of senior management team, as well as Office of General Counsel, have previously reviewed and signed off on these documents on the previous drafts related to the April, that were provided April 17th. This concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Wanamaker regarding the annual disclosure reports? These were previously presented and discussed at our last board meeting and then again at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. And as Mr. Wanamaker indicated, made a number of changes in response to board comments and questions at those prior meetings. Anything else before I call for a vote? I have a motion to approve the annual disclosure reports for filing with MSRB.
So moved.
I'll take that as a motion from Ms. Flanagan, a second from Mr. Cumber. Any other questions, any discussion?
I could just make one comment, Mr. Chair.
Please.
Ryan, I want to just thank you for working with the F&A committee and making the necessary edits to get me comfortable, so I appreciate that.
No problem.
Any other comments, questions, discussion? All in favor of approving the motion to file the annual disclosure, 2017 annual disclosure reports with MSRB as presented, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, all in favor. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wanamaker.
Thank you.
Ms. Flanagan, Compensation Committee recommendation.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Yesterday, we conducted our meeting of the Compensation Committee for the purpose of reviewing proposed employment agreements for the interim managing director and chief executive officer for Mr. Zahn, and the employment agreement of president and chief operating officer for Ms. Dykes. Since the initial distribution of documents to the board members, there were some minor modifications that were made around the effective dates in both agreements. Our robust discussion occurred at the committee level yesterday. However, as a result of that discussion, we also have removed the clause referencing 280 hours of leave within the annual leave paragraph of each contract, but otherwise the contracts remain intact as proposed and negotiated by the board chair. The committee did have a recommendation for Ms. Dykes' contract to have an addendum prepared outlining her roles and responsibilities. Given that this request was made of the Compensation Committee yesterday and the significance of the role itself, we'd like to give Mr. Zahn an opportunity of a little bit more time in detailing out those objectives, roles, and responsibilities, and would request that the board delegate authority to the Compensation Committee Chair to further review that once prepared, but otherwise entertain motions to bring each of the agreements forward for board approval.
Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. I really appreciate the work that you and your committee put into the contracts and also the search firm, which will come up next on the agenda. Ms. Flanagan's been traveling internationally and carved out time, significant amount of time to deal with these issues. So thank you very much for that. Any questions of Ms. Flanagan? Ms. Brooks?
None for Ms. Flanagan, but I made an error in Ms. Dykes' contract. I did not remove the effective date definition on the first page of Ms. Dykes. That should be struck through because it's redefined it on page 2. So the effective date clause in the first paragraph needs to be stricken. Sorry, that was my oversight.
Okay. Any other questions? Reverend Newbell, I know that you weren't participant in yesterday's Compensation Committee report. I trust that you've had an opportunity to review this. Did you have any questions regarding the proposed employment contracts for either Mr. Zahn or Ms. Dykes?
I did have an opportunity to review it, and I have no questions.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. I'll ask for a motion to accept the recommendation of the Compensation Committee to approve the contracts as presented with the delegation of authority to the Compensation Committee to work with Ms. Dykes and Mr. Zahn on a description of her responsibilities and with the one scrivener's error.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. I'll take that from Reverend Newbill. Any other discussion around these contracts? As Ms. Flanagan noted, we had over an hour of discussion yesterday at the Compensation Committee, which involved 4 of the 5 board members, so there was robust discussion and edits made there. But any other comments, changes, discussion? Mr. Zahn?
I just want to highlight some important facts that were also talked about at the Compensation Committee. Number one, that part and parcel with the compensation for the executive contracts, the senior leadership team over the last 3 to 4 weeks really has rallied together to come forward with about $8.7 million of going forward cost savings for the benefit of the city and JEA. I really commend that teamwork and the number of initiatives that have been established by the team. My hope is that we continue to see process improvements and efficiencies because they truly have some really great ideas. And I think this is just the beginning. Second, I think we also talked about taking care of the entire appointed employee base and making sure that when employees take care of your customers and they take care of the company, that the company takes care of them. And so we talked about that as well. And so I just really appreciate the insights of the Compensation Committee and the board, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Any other questions or comments regarding the 2 contracts before the board?
Mr. Chair, I think at the Comp Committee we had talked about a job description for the President and Chief Operating Officer. I think that was emailed to us before the meeting, but is there a reason why that's not attached to this contract, but there's a job description attached for the Managing Director and CEO?
Yes, I'm sorry that wasn't clear. As Ms. Flanagan mentioned in her introductory remarks. Yeah, that's all right. Just not enough time to finalize them.
That's my fault. So the reality is Ms. Dykes and I did a Herculean effort until late last night trying to produce a job description, and then upon sleeping on it, both of us agree that trying to rush to define how and the role and responsibilities interface with the rest of the company as well as with the rest of management didn't seem to do sufficient merit to the role itself. And so I requested that, in fact, we be able to approve the contract absent a job description with granting authority to the chair to be able to
move forward. Sorry if I missed that.
That's all right. Any other questions? Okay, so the motions have been moved and seconded to adopt the contracts as presented for Mr. Zahn and Ms. Dykes, with the one Scribner's error and with the delegation of authority, actually the Compensation Committee, to work with Ms. Dykes and Mr. Zahn on finalizing that job description as Exhibit A to Ms. Dykes' contract. Any other discussion? If none, all in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Any opposed? None. Passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Flanagan. You're still up.
The next topic of consideration that the Compensation Committee reviewed yesterday was in regard to the selection of an executive search firm for the recruitment of and placement of our permanent CEO position. I want to give a tremendous thank you to the staff. I've received wonderful support from Mr. McCarthy and Ms. Ayers in terms of their support from an HR and procurement perspective. That was quite helpful. We put the bid out following last month's board meeting. As everyone will recall, the Compensation Committee had been charged to do. Upon receipt of the respondent bids, I was able to narrow the firms down to 3 final selections, those being Heidrick Struggles, Russell Reynolds, and ZRG Partners. You'll recall that ZRG Partners had been one of the firms that JEA has previously used and was referenced in the last board meeting, and took and conducted interviews with those 3 finalist firms. On the whole, I thought that all 3 firms brought tremendous skill, engagement team partners, and leadership and capabilities of performing a search. The 2 criteria that I identified as being the most important in our selection was around the search firm's particular experience in recruiting and hiring at the CEO or president level within the utility industry. And we received benchmarking and success statistics from each of the firms as it related to their success at the CEO, president level, board of directors, and senior executive level, which I have summarized for the Compensation Committee members and has been shared with my fellow board members. That had a clear and evident result to me that Heidrick Struggles has the greatest experience of recruitment at the CEO president level. On that basis, they are my recommendation, which was presented to the Compensation Committee yesterday. The other element, which I touched on as being important, is the element of fee. To review, Heidrick and Struggles does have in transparency, does have the highest projected cost of the 3 finalists. They are structured at a 33% of total compensation for the expected role, whereas Russell Reynolds was structured as 30% with a $120,000 minimum, and ZRG was structured as 29% with an $80,000 maximum. So on that basis, Hendrick Struggles could cost $132,000 if this was based on a $400,000 salary, just for purposes of understanding the materiality of the contract. So despite being higher priced than CRG and Russell Reynolds, I believe that Heidrick Struggles' experience outweighs that cost differential at a position that has this much importance to the board. That is my recommendation. It was accepted and approved by the Compensation Committee. We bring that forward for the full board's consideration today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Flanagan. Would you mind summarizing? I appreciate the work that went into the objective matrix that you and Ms. Hires compiled for purposes of this, and Mr. McCarthy, sorry, compiled for purposes of this evaluation. Would you mind sharing with the full board the final scoring for the three firms that made the final cut?
Sure. I have Hydrick at 72 points, Russell Reynolds at 62 points, and ZRG at 65 points.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Those materials were shared with the Compensation Committee yesterday and are publicly available. Anyone have any questions regarding Ms. Flanagan's report, or if anyone would like to hear from Ms. Hires or Mr. McCarthy on this search?
How many bids did we get?
8.
So we had a good competition.
We did. We specifically requested from 5, and then because it was a publicly available bid and solicitation, we had 3 additional firms that responded.
Anything else? Ms. Green? Reverend Newbill, did you have any questions of Ms. Flanagan and the Compensation Committee regarding the evaluation of the executive search firm?
No, I don't.
Thank you.
Mr.
Yes,
Chair,
Mr.
so
Tillman.
I had to hang up early from the Compensation Committee yesterday, so just a couple questions. So we are approving the selection of a firm. Can you, and maybe this through the chairs to Chair Flanagan, what are the next steps once we select the firm today? Are we selecting a firm and they're starting the process immediately? Are we selecting a firm and having them come and meet with the JEA board to talk through a job description for the position?
Yes, so the appointment of the firm does not dictate the timeline. One of the things, so that our recommendation from the Compensation Committee yesterday was appointment of the firm, but we did not get to the level of discussing our expected timeline. We wanted to bring forward that discussion to the entire board for its consideration. Each of the firms under consideration recommend coming to Jacksonville and meeting with the board in the format, which is possible to do in the format of a workshop, so that we have the opportunity to work together in further refining the job responsibilities and expectations of the role, as well as the timeline that we would like to achieve. And each of the firms are accommodating and able to respond to what the board ultimately decides is its timeline.
I think that's exactly right. I think today's action item is the selection of the firm, and then we would move, and I agree with the suggestion from the Compensation Committee that a workshop is probably the best format for this group to discuss what type of CEO profile we would give to the search firm so that they could have a yardstick for measuring candidates that they're presenting to the board. And certainly the profile that we've attached to Mr. Zahn's contract will be a starting point for that discussion. But there's no fixed timeline, and there's as yet no defined CEO profile to give to that search firm. It's my opinion that this board should proceed with due haste, but not be hasty. This process needs to be deliberate. It needs to be intentional. We need to hire the best permanent CEO that we can find. I think that that workshop should be scheduled in the next month so that we can get that information to the search firm so that they can begin their work this summer.
Chairman
Ms.
Howard,
Green.
I do agree. I agree that we need to move hastily. But I also think that I think we're putting the cart before the horse. I think that I would like for us to reconsider making a selection today, but giving the 3 firms the opportunity to present to the entire board. As you heard, Chairman Cumber was not able to hear the entire presentation yesterday at the compensation meeting, and I think this is a very important decision. I think we should slow the process down, not that we are not eager to replace and we want to make sure that we get the right person. Is there an opportunity that the 3 firms that have made the cut, that they could come and present to the board? Is that a possibility?
Well, I'll turn to Ms. Hires and Ms. Flanagan. I know that each of you and Mr. McCarthy were involved in the interview of those 3 firms. Did they present to the group of you in any sort of organized format, or were you evaluating their merits on the basis of their bids?
Because I was in London, it was over teleconference. I had PDF materials in front of me, and we spent an hour with each of the three firms and additional time with Ms. Ayers and Mr. McCarthy. My personal opinion, having invested that amount of time, I'm confident that all three firms are of very high caliber within the executive search recruitment industry. And to me, the very most important factor that differentiates the three is their individual success of hiring at this position. I've been able to satisfy my own fact-finding approach in terms of obtaining that quantifiable information, and I personally don't need anything further to be comfortable proceeding with hydric struggles, but defer to the board with what makes them most comfortable.
Well, let me just ask that question in a slightly different way. Do you believe that you would have the opportunity to learn anything new based on a in-person presentation to the full board that might influence a different outcome than the metric scoring?
I do not.
May I call on Ms. Hires to comment on that? Ms. Hires, you and Mr. McCarthy took an active role in this process, and for that we appreciate. Thank you. For that, we appreciate all the effort that you've put into this. Ms. Green has suggested that the board would benefit from having in-person interviews, presentations from the three finalists. And I'll just ask you the same question I asked Ms. Flanagan.
Chairman, before
Sure.
Ms. Ayers answers, I want to be more specific.
Okay.
I have no doubt that the three that are recommended, that Board Member Flanagan has done the due diligence and that they are the top qualified. But there were things that we learned in the compensation meeting that we learned on the spot. Some that we had previously, that JEA had previously worked with, some that were actually involved with the hiring of existing employees. So I think that we should be giving them an opportunity to explore all of that directly with the firms. No doubt that the firms are qualified.
Okay.
Can I,
Mr. Cumber?
because I had to hang up early, can you be more specific on what you're referring to?
Well,
Hydric Struggles, the winning bidder,
Yeah.
was also the firm that placed Ms. Dykes. I think.
Correct.
So, yeah.
correct.
Which came out in the compensation committee, perhaps when you weren't on the phone. Ms. Hires, is there? I don't want to discourage the idea. I'm just trying to get to whether or not we need to go through that next step. Is there anything that a in-person presentation from the three finalists would present that might lead you to change your conclusions?
Well, through the chair, I would like for it to be understood for the record that the decision was made and evaluated by Ms. Flanagan. However, I will say that the presentation was very thorough. Those presentations was given to Ms. Flanagan, Mr. McCarthy, and myself. And based upon the presentations, which were standard, which would have been the ones that they would have conducted under any circumstance, I felt that they were very thorough. They answered all the questions that Ms. Flanagan posed to them. I don't think there would be anything else that they would be able to answer or respond to other than individual questions from board members that would change that decision. As I mentioned in the compensation committee yesterday, is that these are firms that I'm very well familiar with. In the 30 years that I've been in this industry, I've worked with many of them. Based upon the criteria that Ms. Flanagan was looking for, I think that Hydric Struggles does fit that with the placement of CEOs within the utilities industries at a higher level than the other firms that were the part of the three finalists. One of the things that I will also add, when I'm speaking to some of our peers around the industry, specifically with the Energy Authority, who we partner with very greatly, it is the firm that they often prefer as well. So based upon that, I was well pleased, although I was not the one to evaluate the firms and listening to the presentations. It is what I would have expected at the level of the firms that we were having the proposals from.
Okay. Well, thank you. And thank you for noting that board member Flanagan was the one who actually did the scoring. But I know you were involved in the process of collating I've forgotten, do we have a motion and a second on the table, and this is discussion, or there's no motion yet?
There's no motion yet.
Okay. Thanks for reminding me, keeping me straight. So the Compensation Committee made the recommendation at yesterday's meeting to bring to the board a motion to hire Hydrick Struggles. Ms. Green has asked that that be delayed pending a presentation by the three firms to the full board. Is that?
Yes, I think that Chairman Cumber's question about the process, that we're not able to answer that today. And through those interviews, we should have been able to identify with each of those firms what their processes are going forward. So I think that gives us the opportunity to hear what they've done in the past with other agencies, as well as us having the input in that.
Okay. So I don't want to step on any toes. You've expressed a desire to have this process insert another step in the process with presentations from the three candidates.
important.
So do you want to put that in the form of a motion?
Sure.
Make your motion.
I'd like to have a motion that we not make a selection today and choose the firm, but that we allow the three top firms that has been selected through our compensation committee's process and due diligence to present to the entire body of the board before we make a decision on who to choose.
Okay, let me try and summarize. We've got a motion for the three finalists to present to the board before a selection is made.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Any other questions or discussion on that suggestion?
Yeah, if I could ask a couple of follow-ups. I'm sorry, Chair Flanagan, if this was in your opening. Maybe it'd be helpful just to get on the record. I know at the last board meeting I asked Ms. Hires if she could mention the companies that ZRG had worked with. I know in your scoring, Hydrick had really stood out. What companies had Hydrick worked with, and and I assume they were all CEO level positions that they were doing the search for.
All of that information is presented in Ms. Flanagan's booklet that she has for the Compensation Committee.
Is that in ours
And-
too?
All RFP responses were provided to the compensation committee members?
No, not to the full Compensation Committee. They were provided to you.
You've got the bar graph chart that was emailed to you yesterday that's to your
Yes.
right, and that summarizes the level of experience. each
I
of
was
the
talking
three
about
finalists.
specific utility companies.
Oh, the names of
The
clients.
names, yeah. Which I see is
Happy
in
to,
Ms. Flanagan's
happy to
cheat sheet there.
provide to, would you like me to read or pass along?
I don't know. Jody, what can we do?
Was any of that information submitted to us on a confidential basis, do we know? Are we able to share that?
We're able to share that
Okay.
because that information was submitted via the proposals.
Great, thanks.
If it wasn't marked proprietary, then it's not protected. It'd be
And
marked
then I respect the Ms. Green's comment about what you guys learned at the end of the meeting. Again, maybe this is a question through the chair to Angie, is I've got to imagine that those conflicts have occurred in the past. I don't know if conflict's the right word. How do search firms usually handle it? So the perception is it's a wide open field and there's no apparent conflict, I guess is the right word.
Okay, I'm not quite understanding your
Well,
question.
if I heard correctly from Ms. Green, one of the concerns is, I just shut this, sorry. One of the concerns is
No.
that Hydrick
No.
and Struggles was involved with the search for a previous employee here. I assume that happens, all the time across, with search firms,
That is
so-
very common.
Yeah.
And if that would
So-
if that would exclude them, that would also exclude ZRG.
Correct. So there has to be, I assume, a natural, like in accounting, you rotate partners, right? So, it would search firms, do rotate partners to make sure that, a partner that's involved with the search this time wasn't involved last time? I'm just trying to think through, because I don't want to repeat the amount of time Chair Flanagan put into this, because I'm sure it was not a limited amount of time. And so I have a lot of confidence. What I'm trying to figure out is if there's a concern that there is a potential conflict here, is there a resolution to that conflict that makes everybody feel more comfortable?
But through the
can I be
chair,
more
if you don't
specific?
mind if I respond.
Ms. Hires.
There is normally not one person that's assigned to the team. There's normally one lead, but there, as Ms. Flanagan will attest, there is normally a group of people who work that account for the search with us. So each of them presented a team. So even if there was a situation where a particular recruiter might have assisted us with the search in the past, it wouldn't necessarily mean that that person will run lead for this particular project. There's a whole team effort.
No, I understand that, but there's always a lead to the team, right?
Right.
So,
And if any time the board or the compensation committee felt that there might be a conflict, I, for one, I'm not familiar with the person that was involved in Ms. Dyke's recruitment because I wasn't employed here at the time, but I could easily get that information if that was a concern. And first of all, we have to be also certain that Ms. Dykes would be submitting her name
yeah,
as a part
I get that.
of
I'm
the
trying to
recruitment.
just address the perceived.
Ms. Green?
So through the
conflict
chair, there's no conflict. I use that example of information that we found out minutes before we voted on it. I only use that as a reference that since I've been on the board, there has been a process of we get information, we vote on it, and I feel like as a board, as a whole, we need to be more diligent, especially in a decision like choosing the CEO in the climate that JEA has been incurring, that we need to be more diligent.
Any other questions or comments on the, we have a motion and a second to invite the three finalists to make a in-person presentation to the board before selection is made. Any other questions, comments? Reverend Newbill, I don't mean to ignore you.
No, I'll jump in when I have something.
Please do.
I'm fine.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Flanagan.
I would just like to clarify that I don't want my support of selecting a firm to be misconstrued as moving too hastily. If anything, I feel that I was responding to the direction that was provided in last month's board meeting by the entire board. The process was determined collectively, agreed to, and that's the process that was followed. So I do appreciate a diligent search and of the belief that that was put into this in accordance to what the plan was. I'm hesitant to delay this any further and have this go into another month.
And I'm glad you articulated that, because that's what I'm struggling with. I feel like a month ago we had ZRG. I felt that's where we were getting kind of pressured to agree to a firm that, at least from my perspective, was the first time I had even heard of the firm. And Chair Flanagan's correct, which is, I think I felt pretty strongly that you kind of take the lead in the procurement process and kind of come back to us with a recommendation. So, I have great confidence in Board Member Flanagan's skill set. So I'm just, I'm kind of struggling. I think I guess, Board Member Green, if we were talking about a spread that was, one firm was 3 points ahead of another firm, I'd see the advantage of having the three firms come in. Hydrick, from your perspective, stood out pretty significantly.
Hydrick has more than double the past success of Russell Reynolds in terms of successful recruits at the CEO president level with 34 since 2010. Russell Reynolds has 16, and ZRG has 9.
That's, that's a big spread. So I feel like the even if we said that there was some subjectivity into the scoring, I mean, it's a pretty big spread. It's not like, second and third were 2 points behind. So those are just my thoughts.
I appreciate that. Anything else, Ms. Green?
So if I could, being now that Mr. Zahn has stepped down and taken a new role, I am still considered the newest board member. And if I look back over the last 4 board meetings that I have participated in, there are some decisions as a board that have been made that I wish, as an individual board member, that I would have had more input, more opportunity to be able to ask those questions. I'm not sure if the rest of my board members feel the same way, but I personally feel that way. I actually endured a city council meeting on decisions that I had 0 input on. So this is not about competency. I have more than much respect, and that Board Member Flanagan did a phenomenal job, and appreciate the time and effort that went into this. I'm not sure how we went in that direction, that it was about competency. That is truly not the case, but I think that the microscope that JEA as an organization has found itself in, whether it be of the board's fault or not, we're here. I think we owe it to the employees who will work for the next CEO, as well as the shareholders involved, that we take our time and we make sure that we're all given the opportunity to vet the search firm.
Okay. Anybody else want to be heard before we call the question on this motion? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we extend to the finalist, 3 finalists for search firm, an opportunity to come and present in person to the board before we vote on the selection of that search firm. I'll take a roll call vote, and I'll just do so alphabetically. Mr. Cumber.
And I'm sorry, the yes vote would be
Yes,
to have
would
the
delay
3.
it. Yeah,
Okay.
no would be to.
So no.
It's a no vote. Ms. Green.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Ms. Flanagan.
No.
Ms. Green.
Yes.
Reverend Newbill, a yes vote would be to have an in-person presentation from the finalists. A no vote would be to proceed with the selection now.
Yes.
Chair will break the tie with a no. So we'll entertain the motion from the
Well, to be
compensation
clear,
committee.
we need 4 votes, right?
Need 4
suppose.
votes for there to be affirmative action,
Oh,
so that
so
the
it
motion
fails.
fails.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So then we would entertain a motion from the compensation committee to proceed with the engagement of Heidrick and Struggles.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. So any discussion on the proceeding with the engagement of Heidrick and Struggles? Any other questions about Heidrick and Struggles engagement? Reverend Newbill?
No.
Okay. All right, with the motion is second to engage Heidrick and Struggles as the executive search firm, I once again ask for a roll call vote. All in favor, Mr. Cumber?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
No.
Reverend Newbill?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes.
4 votes, motion passes.
Okay, thank you. So, Ms. Hires, if you'll communicate with Heidrick Struggles, that the Board of Directors of JEA has approved their engagement, and if you could present the contract for that engagement to Ms. Brooks, our Chief Legal Officer.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all your work, and for Mr. McCarthy as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Before we move to the next agenda item, I wanted to say I agree with Ms. Green that this board needs to be deliberate, and we need to take our time, There's no more important decision that we will make, perhaps in our tenure as members of this board, than the engagement of the next CEO. And it will be a thorough and transparent process. I've followed with some interest the process that the school board has been going through over the last couple of months. I would suggest that that's an appropriate model for us to look at. We should be considering in-person interviews in the sunshine with those finalist CEO candidates, so that everyone has an opportunity to evaluate their ability to lead this wonderful organization. So, with that, moving on, I think we're up to an introduction of or a discussion of the reorganization under 4A. Mr. Zahn.
Yeah, so I more appreciate it, Chair. Thank you very much. It's curious that rainstorms always come by during conversations of tents. Transition, it's really more a conversation and an update on the transition plan process that was previously discussed at one of the prior board meetings. I'll take you to, and what we are on is article number 4A. And really what I'm going to take you to is the path forward. This has been discussed. JEA's customers, employees, and shareholder, the city, are my personal and JEA's top priorities. I think in the past 4 weeks, we've accomplished in substantive and substantial form step one, which is I've worked with the board, the city council, all 19, the mayor, and senior leadership to reinvigorate and refocus on JEA's core business of providing high-quality essential services to its customers. To that end, we've completed a reorganization of the company that mirrors that focus on serving the customer. The team has also worked to deliver operating efficiencies that I've already spoken about to the benefit of the city, and I've worked with this board to make sure that we can take care of our employees. This is really just the beginning of a multi-month process in my view. We have now started the engagement of step two. My estimate is that, and hope, is that this is a 3 to 4 month step. I have also, in meeting with all 19 board members, or city council members, the mayor, the board, and other critical stakeholders in the community, we've listened to their perspective, and we've worked on gaining buy-in on the need to have a united community on defining the purpose of JEA going forward for our community, as well as to the city as a shareholder. I'm happy to report that all the parties I just mentioned believe a methodical, open, and meaningful dialogue on this matter is critical and timely. With this board, I look forward to collectively leading that conversation and working in partnership with all of those shareholder trustees and employees and stakeholders on accomplishing step two, which is effectively documenting a shareholder framework that this board and the leadership can use as a measuring stick going forward for an update to the strategic plan of the company. Step three, if we were to be successful in getting a shareholder framework and a general consensus around it, would be in collaboration with all of our stakeholders just mentioned above, that we would then update the strategic plan to look forward at the emerging industry around us and play a key role in providing unparalleled services to our customers, driving economic development and job creation for the city of Jacksonville and the greater northeastern Florida region, as well as acting as leaders in the stewardship of local environment, and JEA is an invaluable asset. I've given you a series of other materials that are more in detail, but I've provided a synopsis of what I believe to be roughly a 12-month process, where we've gone through the first month of stabilizing and refocusing on core business. The next 3 to 4 months, we'll be working collaboratively with this board, the senior leadership, and city council and administration on that shareholder framework, and I look forward to that continued work.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. I appreciate that. Any questions or comments to Mr. Zahn? Ms. Flanagan? Mr. Cumber?
I'm good.
Ms. Green?
No, answer my question regarding timeline.
Reverend Newbill?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Zahn, I appreciate the work that you've put into this. I especially appreciate the efforts from the senior team members, all of whom have partnered with you in sort of refocusing JEA on our serving our customers. We look forward to continued great ideas and progress as you move forward. We'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, and your proposal to include in our agenda subject matter explorations each month.
Yeah, and I don't have any further comments because I covered this in the agenda conversation.
Thank you. Then we're on committee reports. Item 6A, Ms. Flanagan, Finance and Audit Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To report back to the board that the Finance and Audit Committee has met. Topics of discussion from our committee included approval of the minutes from the prior meeting, review of the fiscal 2019 budget presentation, quarterly audit services update, an ethics officer quarterly report, electric system and water and sewer system reserve fund quarterly report, the JEA Energy Market Risk Management Policy Report, the annual disclosure report, as well as additional committee sub-meetings with our auditors from Ernst & Young and our internal director of audit services. Items of note, you provided thanks earlier to board member Cumber for his diligence in review of the annual disclosure report. That's something that as a fellow board member, I'm thankful and appreciative of his attention to detail and management's responsiveness in terms of addressing our concerns there. And only other item that I would like to bring to the board's attention is specific and robust discussion with our E&Y audit firm as it relates to Plant Vogel, the topic of disclosures within the annual financial statements and quantification of any liability. There are a lot of challenges as it relates to governmental accounting standards that make it difficult if a potential liability has uncertainty in terms of its probability, likelihood of happening, as well as difficulty in quantification of it, which is the reason why it has not been presented as a balance sheet liability within the financials to date. However, that is something that is a continued focus for them and will be in this year's annual report in terms of continuing to assess that. So that's something that the Finance and Audit Committee will remain particularly interested in.
Thank you. And so all that was informational. No action items from Finance and Audit. That was a lengthy committee meeting, but very informative. I appreciate our Ernst & Young team sticking around to discuss with the board the Vogel and overall enterprise risk management issues. So thank you for that. Compensation Committee report. You're up a lot today.
There's, fortunately, there's really not much more to report from the Compensation Committee. We've covered all of the content of yesterday's meeting already.
Great. Thank you very much. No action items on the Compensation Committee?
No action on the minutes, but the minutes were approved by the comp committee.
Thank you. Then we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 7A, old business, and invite Paul Cosgrave, our Chief Information Officer, to the table. Mr. Cosgrave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today with a request to rescind resolution number 2018-01 that would authorize JEA to invest in the expansion of our existing fiber optic network with the intention to lease dark fiber. Now, as you will recall, JEA's charter currently limits our investments to only those assets that are specific to our own purposes. So the proposal we put forth in March was limited and only contained a rather moderate business plan at that time. Since that time, management has had an opportunity to rethink that strategy and believes we can develop and present back to you a much more aggressive and bold plan that, when coupled with other new initiatives, will address much of the concern of stagnant growth in the core business. So it's our intent to come back to the board with that plan in a few months' time. The new plan will involve a partnership strategy with communications companies. We expect the new plan will have the full support of the Jacksonville community. Therefore, we request that you rescind Resolution 2018-01 that passed, at the March board meeting in anticipation of a new plan to be presented at a future meeting in concert with the future strategic plan that will contain a number of new bold initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Cosgrave. Does everyone understand the recommendation from staff to rescind the the resolution 2018-1 adopted by the board a couple of months ago relating to a request to City Council to expand our dark fiber services, rescission in favor of coming back to the board with a more ambitious plan?
Correct.
Thank you. Any questions?
So moved.
Oh, I like that. It's moved. Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Green. So any questions of Mr. Cosgrave regarding this proposal from staff?
Mr. Chair, I don't have a question, but I have more of a statement. So I have had some conversations with management on this. I think given the, when we passed this resolution, the conversation regarding privatization was still kind of in full throttle. Given that, I do believe that as a board, we should really kind of think through going to the city council not in one-off new revenue opportunities, but more as a kind of a holistic package of here are the new lines of business that JEA wants to go into, here are the partners that we're going to have for each one of those lines of business, and give city council the opportunity to look at it as more of a package. My concern is if we go to them kind of one-offs, you run the opportunity that you get picked off one at a time, right? And I think as we're thinking about how we transform JEA to give it a financial footing that has strength for the future, comprehensive engagement with the city council as opposed to, an idea at a time is much better from a strategy perspective.
Sorry, Ms. Green?
Okay.
I would echo those sentiments. Like Ms. Green, I've had the pleasure of enduring appearances before City Council, and I don't relish the opportunity of presenting one-off items that would be more easily rejected. But more to the point, I think that we as a board need to be cognizant of a number of the factors that have had the light shone so brightly upon them in the more recent discussions, namely, what is the future of JEA in the face of flat to declining revenue on the electric side, flat to declining growth, a more competitive market environment, an industry that's changing in a very rapid way, technology influencing that change to a great extent. And are there other opportunities beyond dark fiber that might require charter amendments, for example, to loosen the reins on JEA and better facilitate that competitiveness going forward? So I hear what you're saying. I wonder if, and it's only tangentially pertinent to withdrawing the pending resolution, but pertinent in the sense that before they come back with a more ambitious plan, should we also catalog other opportunities that we as a board might want to approach the city council about in terms of loosening those reins on JEA? So I commend you for thinking ahead in that respect. I think that we'll take up Mr. Cosgrave's motion, but then we as a board need to engage staff in evaluating what strictures are imposed by the charter that we should look to address in a conversation with City Council. How did Councilman Schellenberg leave? Right before we got to this point. So I appreciate that observation. Ms. Flanagan, any comments on the motion on the table?
Just out of curiosity, it would be helpful to know what the anticipated timeline could be in terms of coming back to us with a more robust.
It'll be consistent with what Mr. Zahn said earlier, probably in the 3 to 4 months timeframe.
Yeah, so in part and parcel with the chair's comment through the chair, so 3 to 4 month time frame is really one to get a measuring stick, which would outline for this board what the expectations of the city of JEA are. Continued growth and gross profitability, maintenance of the contribution, annual contribution, environmental stewardship, things that we'll outline, and we'll go through that exercise over the next couple months. It would be my anticipation that whether it's myself or someone else, that once you have a measuring stick, you can then engage in a strategic plan update. And that strategic plan update should, to the chair's point and to Mr. Director Cummer's point, contemplate what are if you look at your corporate governance and your charter, what might be specific requests for changes. So that's all part of a comprehensive strategic planning process. Because I think in order to really request and have validity around a request to the city council for any sort of charter change, you have to have conducted analysis, had thorough and thoughtful dialogue as a board of directors and management team, show that it is truly a comprehensive element and part of the core business, and that can be integrated as part of the core business from an execution and operationalization perspective. And that we have, in fact, the resources and talent to continue to execute, or that we have a plan to acquire that. And so I think there's a lot of elements that would go around not only this initiative, but other potential electrification and other initiatives that would have revenue growth opportunities, as well as liability and risk management opportunities. So that to say is, from here going forward, if we can accelerate the measuring stick process, then the sooner the leadership can engage this board of directors and the other stakeholders at large on an update to the strategic plan for the next 10 years. And I think that emerging out of that, you would see not only recommendations of where the company should go, but also thorough and thoughtful financial and resource and capital analysis that could be utilized in a discussion purposes for this board.
That sounds like a long way of saying probably not even 3 to 4 months, longer than that, before they come back with a more robust plan.
That being said, that doesn't mean that we can't monetize the asset that's currently in place. Certainly, there are at least potentials. The reality is we have a very valuable asset. In fact, JEA roughly owns the equivalent of 295 from a fiber optic perspective in Jacksonville. What it means is just we can't spend the CapEx to expand that for the sole purpose of obtaining new revenue. Doesn't mean you can't, and we already currently do, in fact, use that asset in order to generate revenue. And Paul, I believe it's a little over $2 million a year with a very high gross profit margin. So there are opportunities to monetize the asset without continuing to invest CapEx at this point.
Any other questions related to the motion at hand? Reverend Newbill, any questions of Mr. Cosgrave on rescinding the resolution 2018-01?
No, sir.
Thank you. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Cosgrave. Appreciate that. Is there any other old business to come before the board? Is there any new business to come before the board? Open discussion, then. As longtime observers of this board will recall, we don't have the opportunity under Sunshine Law to speak amongst ourselves, as Ms. Green has pointed out. So this is an opportunity for us to raise questions and chat amongst ourselves as a board in the full glare of the sunshine. Ms. Green.
Just to kind of reiterate that, I wanted to make sure that my comments today in regards to maybe not moving forward with selecting a firm was not of any indication that the hard work that was put in by Board Member Flanagan was slighted in any way. The information that you provided in the compensation meeting was exceptional. But we are all familiar with the Sunshine Law that worked against us, even in the selection of our current interim CEO, where the appearance was there was no discussion from the board regarding a very large decision that we made, when in fact we all had the opportunities to have communication with both of the candidates, but that was not presented to the public. And so the appearance, the optics were that as the board, that we were not doing our due diligence. And I just wanted to make sure that it's understood that it was not about skill set. It was not about the time and hard work that was put in to doing that, but that we need to be as transparent to show the community that we are doing our due diligence.
Thank you. I appreciate you clarifying that and certainly understood that. As an aside, I received a letter from the City Council President, Anna Brochet, last Thursday afternoon. I intend to respond to Ms. Brochet. I believe a copy has been provided to you by JEA staff, so you all have a copy of that letter. I will respond to her in writing this week and share a copy of my response with this board. So, thank you, Ms. Green. Mr. Cumber?
A few things. So the contracts we approved today, as well as the one for Mr. McElroy, contained an indemnification. And Ms. Brooks, maybe this is directed to you a little bit. And I don't know how the other board members feel, but, having just gone through the annual disclosure reports and, having some very productive conversations with management, do board members have indemnification as well?
You want to take that? Or you want me? There has been robust discussion around this issue in the last week to 2 weeks, Mr. Cumber. So the technical answer to your question is no, but under Florida statutes, board members are treated as public officers under, and you'll see the references to the statutes, pertinent statutes in the contracts for Mr. Zahn and Ms. Dykes. 768-28-9A provides statutory immunity for public officers, which would include board members of this independent authority as a subdivision of the city of Jacksonville, which is a subdivision of the state. You need to stop me if I misstate anything. So we enjoy immunity from any claims against us that would otherwise make us personally liable for injury or damage suffered as a result of any act, event, or omission of action in the scope of our function as a director. In addition to that, there's a statute, 11107, that provides the city would make available to us a defense. So the Office of General Counsel or outside counsel they engage would defend the board of directors in any action against you individually for actions arising out of your service as a director. You've been in business long enough to understand that immunity and defense is not the same as indemnification.
Right.
And so that express request was made. I will tell you that the language that we approved today for Ms. Dykes and for Mr. Zahn, according to the Office of General Counsel, is unique among the independent authorities and their officers, and that no other independent authority, board, or executive officer enjoy express indemnification contractually. That's right.
Statutorily, it's there. Contractually, it's not.
But contractually, it's not. And we don't have a contract of indemnification. So the suggestion was made by me to the Office of General Counsel that it might be appropriate to have a separate indemnification contract from the city to each of its independent, not just JEA, but the boards of each of its independent authorities. I've not received a response to that, but that was my suggestion to your point.
Have you received an acknowledgement of your request?
Oh, we were on the phone.
Okay. Okay, so you will keep us updated on those conversations.
Ms. Brooks or I will continue to press the issue, but it's an issue of first impression for the Office of General Counsel, apparently.
Okay. And I've got a few things, so I apologize. Sure. Ms. Brooks, I know we had talked about Plant Vogel and that we couldn't have a shade meeting as a board to discuss that. I know there was some discussion about potentially just looking at that again. I just wanted to confirm that nothing has come to light that would allow us to have a shade meeting on that issue.
nothing has come to light. You have to be actively engaged in either a litigation matter in order for your attorney to call a shade meeting, either an administrative hearing process or a litigation matter for a shade meeting to occur. And litigation shade meetings, too, are very prescriptive by statute as to who's allowed in the room. Court reporter takes down everything, and that transcript becomes a public record after the fact. And it's limited to that litigation matter. It's not just an open discussion about Vogel. And so just to understand from a shade perspective, there is some very prescriptive things. If it gets into a litigation arena, then I'd be able to call a shade to get advice from a strategy or for settlement purposes. But we're not at that juncture yet. So a shade meeting is not proper or approved by statute. I believe there's going to be some one-on-one dialogue with each of the board members about the most recent updates to Vogel. Those are, I believe, would be appropriate to have one-on-one discussions with each of the board members.
Great.
That's how we're going to handle that.
Thank you. I also just wanted to remind Mr. Zahn and make sure the board members that are not on the F&A committee, we talked at the last Finance and Audit Committee meeting about scheduling a discussion at the board level on rate restructuring. And so I just want to make sure that that doesn't fall through the cracks and gets scheduled. And then my last issue, which, depending on how other board members feel, may be something that I want to propose some action on. So I just went through my reappointment process. And
Congratulations.
I think so. Find out if the chair gets me indemnification. And obviously in my meetings, a lot came up on, privatization, just kind of, and I think this kind of triggered with some things that Board Member Green mentioned, which is, the perception that, we're not conversing in full transparency. And when it comes to the privatization conversation, I think Mr. Zahn took a great step of helping to calm employees down, saying, I want to put the privatization discussion on hold. The mayor came out and said he doesn't have any intention of putting a proposal in front of City Council. But as I kind of think back on how we kind of triggered the privatization discussion, we had a board member at his last meeting, put the idea before us. And then we had a December board meeting. In between the November board meeting and December board meeting, we had a letter, Mr. Chair, that you had sent to management. We didn't talk about privatization at that December board meeting. I kind of went back to my notes. It was like a 44-minute meeting. It was pretty quick. And I kind of recalled my pre-board conversation with the then CEO, saying there'll be plenty of opportunity for the board to provide input, before privatization starts in earnest. We had the first conversation as a board in March. And if you think about the fact that privatization was put on the table at the end of November, and it took till March for this board to actually have an open discussion on it, I really think we should have been on the front end of the discussion as opposed to the back end. Before we even had a conversation, Civic Council had announced a group, City Council had met, I think a special committee was created, it had met. There was a nonprofit foundation that offered to, do a study. And so privatization is always going to come up, right? I mean, it's going to come up 6 years from now, 10 years from now, I don't know when. But I think from a trust perspective from city council members, from a perspective of making sure that there's transparency, I think two things. One, I think it's important that as a board we send a very clear message to management that without clear board action, any process about privatization should not take place. I think it's important that we as a board or whoever's sitting in our seats in the future, I mean, we just talked about hiring a headhunter. We never as a board talked about what firm we were going to hire to do the evaluation or valuation of JEA, right? Now, talk about a big decision. This board had zero input into that. the scope that that firm had, we had zero input on. The questions that I would have liked to see answered, until the report was in draft form, I was never asked. So I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion, kind of in the open around that, and if there's a mutual feeling that the board should, or that management shouldn't be taking on any conversations regarding privatization unless this board has a specific action directing them to, I think it's important that we as a board are on the record stating just that.
Well, let's be clear. This board has never given any direction to staff to pursue privatization. So there's never been an action of this board one way or the other. You're right. The entire privatization discussion got way out ahead in the media and in third-party groups ahead of JEA and its board. So to the extent that they were out there making observations, commentary, jumping to conclusions, there was never any action by this board to direct staff to pursue privatization. There was a question of value and gathering information on which action might have been predicated. But there's never been any resolution or directive from this board to staff or anyone else to pursue privatization. If you're suggesting that this board might consider taking a position that says don't do that, absent any express direction from the board to staff to pursue privatization, I'll go on the record publicly and say I'm not aware of any of those efforts by staff. I've been assured that the direction has been made, that we're not pursuing privatization from the CEO and the president and COO on down, that we're not talking about privatization, we're not pursuing privatization, notwithstanding what rumor and speculation may be taking place in the press. So if you want to go on record on that, make your motion. I think that's a consensus position unless somebody knows something I don't.
So that would be my motion, that absent a board decision to pursue any activities tied to a privatization effort would be put on hold, period.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Revenue Bill. We've got a motion and a second, so I'd invite discussion. Ms. Green?
I agree 100% with Board Member Cumber, absolutely.
Yep. Ms. Flanagan?
I'm supportive.
Yeah. I think this puts us in concert. Yes, Reverend Newbill.
Let me say this. We have no control over those who run out in front of us, especially those who are playing politics. I hope I'm not out of order when I make reference to the letter that was sent to you by the council president. I keep hearing this word clarity and transparency. Clarity and transparency. I heard it during privatization. And once that subject was dealt with, the mayor came out and said, I'm not instructing anybody to do it. We, as Board Member Cumber said earlier, we had no discussion as a movement, rather, as it relates to that. Everything was done that should have been done. But then in the letter, I hear that same word again, clarity and privatization. We've been accused of being the mayor's, under the hand of the mayor controls the board, but it appears to me that the city council want to micromanage the board. I'm going to be honest with this because I've sat quietly, but I'm not a quiet person. This is politics, plain and simple. It's politics, and people need to take us out of it because we're not a political board. We're not running for anything. We don't get paid for doing anything. And I'm very, very disappointed when the leaders of our city, some of the leaders of our city, continue to try to find subject matters that make us look controversial. This is about the mayor and the president of the city council. I may be out of order, but in my opinion, she want to run for mayor, and they're going to continue to find subject matter that make us look controversial so they can pull down the mayor. And so as a board member, I'm saying if you're going to run for mayor, announce your candidacy, but leave JEA out of it. We're an independent authority. We're not controlled by you nor the mayor. Let us do JEA business. And that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Revenue Bill. I appreciate your comments, and I echo the sentiment that as an independent authority, we need to be focused on our customers and delivering electricity, water, and wastewater services safely and efficiently. So yes, let's be about our business, and they can be about theirs. Ms. Flanagan.
Absolutely. Thank you.
There's a motion on the table.
Yeah, I was asking for
Oh, got it.
any discussion, any input she had. Okay. I support the motion. I believe that to the extent there's any speculation, or as the Reverend said, folks running out ahead of us, let's go ahead and put our stake in the ground. We're going to be about our business, and there are no backroom discussions amongst board members and third parties, and by this motion, have not been, will not be any by our staff. So I support the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Passes unanimously.
I think I've used up my allotted time.
I'll yield mine to
I was
you.
going to yield back to Pastor Newell, but
Okay. Ms. Flanagan, anything for open discussion? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next agenda item, interim CEO Zahn.
Favorite part of my new job is actually singing the praises of our team. On the aspect of core business, you'll be delighted to know that the Water and Wastewater Group has opened up the Northwest Regional the water plant, which is really the water plant up at the airport in River City Mall. It's a $10 million project that just went online on April 30th. It increases capacity and reliability of potable water supply for the northern edge of Duval County. And I want to commend the hard work of Haivu, who as a project lead really took on the task under Mr. Roche's leadership in pulling that project over on budget, on time basis. Also, we've had Blacksford, our wastewater reclamation facility on the southwestern service territory, $65 million project that notably was running at about 2 million gallons a day, increasing to about 4 and moving to about 6, all going to reclaim. So additional revenue opportunities as well as better for the environment. And Renetta Marshall, as part of Brian's team as well, did a phenomenal job, and that should reach substantial completion later this month. And is really, if you get a chance, I'm from the wastewater world, so if you get a chance, you should go check out the plant. It's got some great technology. And then last but not least, again, something that the City Council really spends a lot of time talking about, and rightfully so, our septic tank phase-out program really hit a milestone the last couple, I believe it was last week. This is a program that is a partnership between the city and JEA, as many of the board members will know, about a $38 million program, partially funded by COJ and partially funded by JEA. There are 3 specific projects that have been funded. And they were based on health department priorities in terms of the septic tank phase out and moving over to more vertically integrated wastewater and water treatment. By the way, there's also safety and improvement of life standards in terms of fire hydrants that get made as part of these processes. Biltmore, Beverly Hills, and Cristobal are the areas of town. What I'm happy to report is that the project outreach team has obtained the required 70% threshold of signed agreements from the constituents in those neighborhoods under the 6-month deadline that was required for the first 2 projects, and the third project is about to be launched. That would then put JEA on a course for initiating design and project management to commence complete these projects going forward in the future. And really want to send a thank you and for all the hard work by Pete Halleck and Greg Cochran, for their work. This is something that is for the benefit of a number of communities that I think we as a company can do a better job, and we're looking at ways to whiteboard and come up with, present some more cost-effective and efficient solutions for solving this problem, because it is such a large issue from a monetary perspective. But as a first step, I really think this is a great milestone, and really thank everybody for doing that. So that's my report.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any questions for Mr. Zahn? Chair's report's brief. We've covered a lot today. I appreciate the spirit of discussion amongst the board members. A lot of important stuff going on. I should share with the full board that as you know, and as board member Cumber alluded to, the Jacksonville Civic Council, not City Council, Jacksonville Civic Council, is engaged in their own review of JEA as part of their comparative public finance project, and we are providing information to them to assist them in their review. There was a presentation by the leader of that committee, Michael Ward, to City Council last Thursday. So we have responded to requests for information from them. I would ask that Mr. Zahn and Ms. Charleroi work with the board to get a workshop scheduled, and I would invite the participation of Ms. Hires and Representative from Hydrick Struggles so that we can formulate the position profile so that the CEO search firm can move forward on that process. If we could get that workshop among the board scheduled. I know everybody's got travel schedules, but try and get that done in the next month so that we can keep that process moving forward. That's my report. If there's no other business to come before the board, our next meeting is June 19, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, Reverend Newbill.